Almost everyone in New York knows the story. They whisper it in backroom restaurants. They murmur it across poker tables where millions change hands. They say it in dark corners where powerful men pretend not to be afraid. The story is about a man who built an empire from blood and silence. A man who rules the 5 boroughs without ever raising his voice. They say if you cross him, you won't hear the bullet that kills you. Because by the time you realize Adrian Volkov is your enemy, it's already too late. They call him the Devil of Manhattan. But the real story, the one people don't know, is not about the empire he built. It's about the woman who made the devil fall in love, and the night the devil watched her die.
His name is Adrian Volkov. He is 34 years old with dark hair, cold gray eyes, and a face that looks like it was carved out of stone by someone who had never seen a smile before. He stands tall. He moves slow and steady, like a man who has never been in a hurry because the world always waits for him. His voice is quiet, so quiet that people lean in to hear him, which means that when he finally speaks, everyone in the room is already listening. He runs the most powerful criminal organization in New York. 5 boroughs, dozens of neighborhoods, hundreds of men who answer to him and only him. He controls shipping docks, real estate, gambling, and more things that would take too long to list here. He built his empire from nothing, with his own hands, his own mind, and a will so hard it could break concrete. They call him the Devil of Manhattan, not because he looks frightening, although he does. Not because he is violent, although he can be. They call him the devil because once he decides you are his enemy, nothing in the world can protect you. Not money, not allies, not prayer, nothing. You could run to the other side of the earth and somehow eventually, you would turn around and he would be there, looking at you, waiting. He trusts no one. That is the most important thing to understand about Adrian Volkov. Not his power, not his money, not his reputation. The most important thing is this: he does not trust a single person on this planet. Not his soldiers, not his lawyers, not even Marco De Luca, the man who has stood at his right side for 12 years. People find this strange. They say, how can a man live like that? How can you wake up every morning and look at the people around you and feel nothing but suspicion? How can you sit at the same table as someone, eat the same food, breathe the same air, and still think to yourself, this person would betray me if the price was right? Adrian could answer that question easily. He could answer it into words. They would. He knew this not because he was paranoid. He knew it because of what had happened years ago. Because of the thing he never talked about. The thing that turned a young man with hope in his chest into the cold, empty creature the city feared. There had been a woman once. Her name doesn't matter now. What matters is that Adrian had loved her, really loved her. The kind of love that makes a man feel like he is standing on the edge of a cliff and smiling instead of being scared. She had made him feel like the world was bigger and softer than he'd known it to be. She had also been the one who told his enemies where to find him. He had survived the attack. He had not survived the truth. After that, Adrian Volkov closed himself like a door, locked it, threw away the key. He kept only his work, his empire, and the cold satisfaction of knowing that nothing could hurt him anymore because there was nothing left inside him to hurt. That was the man he had become. That was the man who, one rainy Tuesday night in November, got shot twice and ended up bleeding in the back of a car racing toward the nearest hospital. Elena Reyes was 26 years old and had not slept properly in 3 days. She was a medical student in her 3rd year, working late-night shifts at Stevie Michael's Hospital on the east side of Manhattan. It wasn't a glamorous hospital. The hallways were old and the lighting was always slightly too yellow, and the coffee from the break room tasted like hot, dirty water. But the people who worked there cared, and that was the thing Elena had learned mattered most in medicine. She was small, just a little over 5 feet tall, with dark brown hair she usually kept in a messy bun because there was never time to do anything else with it. She had warm brown eyes and a mouth that smiled easily when she wasn't exhausted, which lately wasn't very often. She wore blue scrubs with a small coffee stain on the left sleeve that had survived 3 washes. She had stopped trying to get it out. Elena had grown up in the Bronx, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs and still found time to make dinner every night. She had earned her place in medical school through scholarships and hard work and a determination that her professors described privately as almost frightening. She wanted to be a doctor not because it sounded impressive, but because she had sat in too many waiting rooms as a child, watching her mother cough into her hands, and she had promised herself she would one day be the person on the other side, the one who helped. On this particular Tuesday night, she was reviewing patient charts at the nurse's station when the ambulance bay doors burst open. Two men rushed in, carrying a third between them. The third man was enormous, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark shirt that was soaked black and red with blood. His head was down. His legs were barely working. One of the men holding him was pale with panic. The other had the flat, practiced eyes of someone used to emergencies. 2 gunshot wounds, the flat-eyed one said, not loudly but clearly. Left shoulder, right side, below the ribs. 20 minutes since it happened. He's lost a lot of blood. Elena was already moving. This is something she had noticed about herself during her training. When things got bad, she got calm. Other people panicked. She focused. It was like the noise of the world got turned down and all she could see and hear was the patient, the problem, and the solution. They got him onto a gurney. She pulled on gloves. She checked his pulse, weak, fast, not good, and lifted his shirt to look at the wounds. The shoulder wound was messy but manageable. The side wound was the one she worried about. I need a trauma team in N or prepped, she said to the nurse beside her. Then, to the man on the gurney, can you hear me? I need you to stay awake. What's your name? Silence. Then a low, rough sound that might have been words. Name, she said again, firmer. The man's eyes opened. They were gray, cold as winter sky. Even in this state, bleeding, weakened, on the edge of unconsciousness, those eyes held something. A stillness. A control that didn't fit the situation. Adrian, he said. Adrian. Good. I'm Elena. I'm going to take care of you. Don't die on me. The gray eyes stayed on her face for just a moment. Something in them shifted, something she couldn't name. Then they closed. Elena worked for 4 hours. The side wound had nicked a blood vessel, which meant things got complicated fast. But she was good at complicated. She had a senior surgeon with her by then, a man named Dr. Chen, who was the best trauma surgeon in the hospital, and together they did what needed to be done. They closed the vessel. They cleaned the wounds. They stitched the skin back together with careful, practiced hands. By the time they were done, it was nearly 4 in the morning. Elena stood outside the door and pulled off her gloves and mask and looked up at the ceiling and breathed. He had made it. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know what he had done to earn 2 bullets in his body. She didn't know that the men who had brought him in were already gone, having left false names and a briefcase with enough cash to cover the bill and then some. She just knew that a man had come and broken and she had put him back together. That was enough. Adrian woke slowly, the way you wake from a deep and dreamless place. The ceiling above him was white. The room smelled like antiseptic and plastic. Machines beeped softly beside him. He was in a hospital bed, his shoulder and side wrapped tight with bandages, and 4 running into his left arm. He had been shot before. He knew this ceiling type. He knew this smell. What he was not used to was waking up alive when the wounds had been that bad. He turned his head. The room was quiet. Morning light pressed against the window blinds. A nurse checked something on a monitor and made a note on a clipboard. When she noticed his eyes were open, she said she would get the doctor and left. A few minutes later, the door opened. The doctor who walked in was not what he expected. She was young, small, dark hair, tired eyes, the kind of face that was clearly pretty even underneath the exhaustion. She moved with purpose, not nervous, not impressed by him, just focused, professional, like he was a problem she was here to check on. Good morning, she said. I'm Elena Reyes. I operated on you last night. How are you feeling? Adrian looked at her. He was used to people looking at him with one of 2 things in their eyes: fear, or the careful blank expression of someone trying to hide their fear. This woman had neither. She looked at him the way you look at a car engine, interested in whether it was working correctly. Like I was shot, he said. That tracks, she said, without smiling but with something that almost was one. She checked his chart. The wound on your side was the serious one. You were lucky. Another centimeter to the left and we'd be having a very different conversation. or not having one at all. He watched her work through the examination. She checked his dressings, asked him questions about pain levels, explained what they had done and what he should not do for the next several weeks. She spoke clearly and without drama. She didn't ask how he had gotten shot. She didn't ask about the man who had brought him in. She just did her job. It was strange. Adrian was a man who noticed everything about people. It was how he had survived this long. He noticed the way people held their bodies when they were nervous, the way their eyes moved when they were lying, the small tells that gave a person away. He spent his life reading people like books. Elena Reyes was interesting. There was no performance in her. She was exactly what she appeared to be. A tired young doctor who cared about her patients and was good at her job. He couldn't find the angle. He couldn't find what she wanted, because she didn't seem to want anything. Not from him. That was rare. Almost everyone wanted something from Adrian Volkov. "You'll need to stay for at least 2 days," she said as she finished the examination. "Then you'll need rest. Real rest. For at least 3 weeks. No strenuous activity. A pause. No getting shot again, preferably." This time the almost smile was clearly there. After she left, Adrian lay in the hospital bed and looked at the ceiling for a long time. He told himself it was nothing. A doctor, a woman who had done her job and done it well. He would have his people transfer him to a private facility within the day. He would never see her again. There was no reason to think about her further. But he kept thinking about her eyes. The absence of fear in them. When was the last time someone had looked at him with no fear? He couldn't remember. He didn't go to the private facility. He told himself it was practical CT. Michaels had good equipment, and moving too soon could risk the wound. This was true. It was also not the real reason. He stayed 2 days, as Elena had said. She visited him twice each day, professional and brief, checking his progress. On the second evening, as she was finishing her rounds, he asked her a question. "Why did you choose this hospital?" She looked at him, slightly surprised by the question. He had barely spoken during her visits, mostly answering her medical questions with monosyllables. "It's where I was assigned for my residency," she said. "You could have applied for better placements." "Better how?" He didn't answer. He was watching her face. "This hospital serves people who don't always have other options," she said simply. That seemed like the right place to be. She left to continue her rounds. Adrian was discharged the next morning. He got into the black car that waited for him outside, and his driver pulled into traffic. And New York City moved around him the way it always did, loud and crowded and indifferent, and he sat in the back seat and thought. Marco DeLuca was waiting at the house. Marco was 40 years old, thick-necked, with a smile that was always slightly too wide and eyes that calculated everything. He had been with Adrian for 12 years. He ran the day-to-day operations when Adrian was occupied. He was the closest thing Adrian had to a friend, which is to say he was someone Adrian trusted slightly more than he trusted everyone else, which still was not very much. "You look terrible," Marco said when Adrian walked in. "I was shot." "True. Who handled the problem?" Adrian told him. Marco nodded, made notes, said the men responsible had already been found. Business continued the way business always continued, without pause, without sentiment. But in the following days, between meetings and phone calls and the endless machinery of running an empire, Adrian Volkov did something he had never done before. He had people watch Elena Reyes, not threateningly, not to control her. He told himself and then told himself to stop lying to himself. He just wanted to know she was safe. She lived alone in a small apartment in Upper Manhattan, a 20-minute subway ride from the hospital. She worked long shifts. She bought groceries on Sunday mornings at the market 3 blocks from her building. She called her mother every Tuesday evening. She sometimes sat by her apartment window in the evenings reading thick textbooks, a cup of tea going cold beside her. She had no idea anyone was watching. And then one Tuesday night, a man followed her home from the subway. He wasn't one of Adrian's men. He was something else, a petty criminal. The kind that haunted late-night streets looking for someone alone and tired. He followed her half a block. Then he didn't follow her anymore, because 2 of Adrian's people stepped out of a doorway and spoke to him quietly, and whatever they said was very convincing. Elena never knew. She went home, made her tea, called her mother. Adrian sat in his office and looked at the report his man had given him and felt something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't quite named. It was warm and uncomfortable at the same time, like a frozen hand being held over heat. He didn't examine it too closely. He just made sure his people kept watching. It was 3 months later when their paths crossed again. Elena was leaving the hospital after a double shift, in the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that makes the world look slightly blurry at the edges. It was raining. Thesh had forgotten her umbrella. She stood under the awning at the hospital entrance, watching the rain come down and calculating whether it was worth waiting or just accepting that she would be wet. Elena Reyes. She turned. Adrian Volkov was standing 6 feet away. He was wearing a dark coat, dry despite the rain, which meant someone had just dropped him off. He looked different out of a hospital bed, taller somehow, or maybe just more like himself. The coldness in him was more visible here, out in the world. He was the kind of man that a crowd parted around without people quite knowing why they were stepping aside. She stared at him for a moment. "You're the patient," she said. "From a few months ago. The gunshot wounds." "Yes. You look healthier." "I am. You did good work." She looked at him carefully. She wasn't afraid, exactly. But something in her was paying closer attention. The way you pay closer attention when you hear a sound you can't immediately explain. "What are you doing here?" "I was in the area." She did not look like she entirely believed that, but she was too tired to press. "Can I give you a ride home?" he said. "I don't know you. You know me better than most people do. You had your hands inside my body." It was a strange thing to say. Somehow it was also not wrong. She thought about it for a second, then looked at the rain, then said yes. In the car, quiet, black, warm, they didn't talk much. But the silence was not uncomfortable. He asked her about her work. She told him briefly. He listened in the way that rare people listen, actually listening rather than waiting for a gap to speak. When they pulled up to her building, she turned to look at him. "Who are you?" she said. "Really?" He looked at her. The gray eyes were steady. "Someone you should probably be more careful around," he said. "That's not an answer." "No." He agreed. "It isn't." She got out of the car. At the door, she paused and turned back briefly. "Thank you for the ride," she said. He watched her go inside. He sat for a moment in the back seat, alone, and the city moved around him. He should stop this. Whatever it was, he should stop it right here. He was Adrian Volkov, the devil of Manhattan. He didn't have room in his life for a warm, honest woman who saved people for a living. His world was dark. His world had sharp edges. His world would cut her into pieces. He told himself to stop. He didn't stop. They met again, and again after that. He found reasons. She didn't ask for explanations because she was beginning to understand that explanations from this man were slow in coming and had to be approached carefully, like a wild thing that would bolt if you moved too fast. She was patient. It was part of who she was. He learned her the way he had learned everything else in his life, carefully, systematically, studying every detail. He learned that she laughed easily but cried with great difficulty, as though crying was something she only allowed herself in private. He learned that she was kind to everyone, taxi drivers, cleaning staff, people others walked past without seeing, and that it wasn't performance. She just genuinely saw them as people worth attention. He learned that she had never been in a serious relationship because she had always been too busy, too focused on her work, and also because, as she said once without sentimentality, most men were put off by how much she didn't need them. She learned him too, slowly. She learned that he was still and quiet and watchful. She learned that he never wasted words. She learned that there was a wall around him so thick and tall that she could barely see over the top of it. And that every once in a while, in certain moments, she could see something on the other side of it that looked like grief. She did not yet know why. And then one evening, sitting in a restaurant, he had taken her to quiet, private, the kind of place where the staff materialized with things you needed before you knew you needed them. She asked him directly, "What do you actually do, Adrian?" A pause, a long one. "Things that you would not approve of," he said. "How bad?" "Bad." She held his gaze. She had a look she used sometimes, not angry, not fearful, just clear and straight, like she was looking through the polite surface of a thing to what was actually underneath. "I've heard the name Volkov," she said. "In the neighborhood I grew up in. People said it the way people say a storm is coming. Not talking about a person, talking about a force." He said nothing. He let her put it together. "You're that person," she said. "Yes." Silence. She picked up her water glass and drank from it slowly, looking out the window. He watched her. He was prepared. He told himself he was prepared for her to stand up and leave. It would be the sensible thing, the safe thing. Part of him almost wanted her to, because it would close this door, and closed doors didn't hurt you. She put the glass down. She looked at him. "Why are you telling me the truth?" "Because you asked," he said. "And because you deserved it. Most people in your position would lie." "I know. I didn't want to lie to you." Another long silence. He thought she would leave. He was almost certain she would leave. She reached across the table and touched the back of his hand just for a moment, just briefly, and then pulled back. "I'm not ready to say I'm okay with everything you are," she said. "But I'm not leaving tonight." Adrian Volkov looked at this woman across a table in a quiet restaurant and felt, for the first time in a very long time, something he had no word for. A loosening, like a fist that had been clenched for years, slowly, cautiously opening. He didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. The following months were unlike anything Adrian had experienced since he was young. Not easier. He had never been interested in easy, but different. Like a color added to a world that had been gray for so long he had forgotten the world could look any other way. Elena didn't try to change him. She didn't give him speeches about his choices or ask him to walk away from his empire. She was not naive. She understood, without being told every detail, what his life involved. She chose to be with him anyway, which somehow made her choice feel more real than if she hadn't known. He was careful with her, gentle in the way that very strong people can be gentle when they choose to be with full awareness of what they're holding. He didn't bring his work into the spaces where they existed together, and she, in turn, filled those spaces with things he had not realized he was hungry for, ordinary moments. Meals cooked at home, long conversations about nothing important, the sound of her laugh, the way she fell asleep reading, her book still open on her chest, and wouldn't admit it when he pointed it out. He was not always good at it. Years of armor don't come off easily. He was still cold sometimes, still closed, still the kind of person who could be in the same room as someone and somehow be alone. But she was patient. She didn't demand warmth on a schedule. She just stayed, and gradually, piece by piece, the warmth came on its own. His men noticed the change. They said nothing to his face. No one said anything to Adrian's face that he hadn't invited, but he could feel the shift in rooms when he entered. Something was different about him, and it had a name no one said out loud. Marco noticed too. Marco, who had stood at his side for 12 years, who knew every version of Adrian Volkov that had ever existed. Marco, who had the wide smile and the calculating eyes. Marco watched, and Marco thought. He told himself his thoughts were concern, loyalty, that he was worried about Adrian, about what this softness might cost him in a world where softness was a wound you could die from. He told himself he had Adrian's best interests at heart. He was lying to himself, the way that jealous people often do. The truth, buried under layers of rationalization, was simpler and uglier. Marco had spent 12 years being the man closest to the most powerful person in New York City. He had built his own identity around that position. And now there was someone closer, someone who got to see parts of Adrian that Marco had never seen. He smiled at Elena when he met her. He said the right things. He was polished and pleasant. Inside, he was already making calculations. Elena, for her part, didn't particularly like Marco. She couldn't have said exactly why. He was perfectly nice. Perfectly. That was almost the problem. People who were perfectly nice always made her slightly uneasy, like they had studied niceness rather than felt it. She didn't say this to Adrian. It wasn't her place to dislike his people without cause. She just stayed quiet about it. She wouldn't always have that option. It was Adrian who brought it up first. They were walking along the waterfront one early evening in spring, the city on one side and the river on the other, when he stopped and stood looking at the water for a long time. She waited. She had learned that when he stopped like this, something was coming that required space to arrive. I want to leave, he said finally. Leave where? All of it. He turned to look at her. The empire, the organization, New York, everything I've built. I want to leave. She looked at him carefully. Adrian, people in your position don't just leave. They do when they do it correctly. And you know how to do it correctly? I've been planning it for 2 months. She was quiet for a moment. The river moved beside them. Why? She said, you've built everything you have from nothing. Why would you walk away? He looked at her. For once the wall was all the way down. She could see everything on his face, clear and unguarded. Because I found something I want more than the empire, he said. And the empire will eventually take it from me if I stay. She understood what he meant. She understood what he was saying without saying it. She felt something sharp and sweet move through her chest. Where would we go? He almost smiled. Just almost. Somewhere small. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere with no one who knows my name. She nodded slowly. She had her own fears about this, practical fears, real fears. It wasn't a simple thing, what he was proposing. And yet, when she looked at him standing there in the evening light, vulnerable in a way she had never seen him be, she felt that the right answer was obvious. Okay, she said. Okay, okay, we plan it. We do it. We go. He looked at her for a long moment. You make it sound simple. It's not. But you're not a simple person, and neither am I. And we can figure it out. He reached over and took her hand. He held it carefully. The way he held everything that mattered, like he was aware it could break. And he was the thing that could break it. They walked home along the river. Behind them, at a careful distance, Marco watched. His phone was in his hand. He was looking at a number he had saved months ago. The number of a man whose name was Grigory Vosek, head of the Vosek family, the only rival organization in New York powerful enough to be a genuine threat to Adrian Volkov. Marco stared at the number for a long time. Then he made the call. The plan was set for a Friday. Adrian had arranged everything with his usual precision. The papers, the money, moved carefully over weeks into accounts no one could trace. A house in a small coastal town in Portugal, bought through 3 different shell companies, 2 plane tickets, not in their real names. Elena had packed 1 bag. She had told her mother carefully, without full details, that she was going away for a while. Her mother had cried and then said she was proud of her, and then cried some more. Elena had promised to call from wherever she ended up. Friday night, 11 o'clock. A car would take them to a private airfield outside the city. At 10:45, they were ready. Adrian stood in the front room of his apartment, looking at the city through the window. He had looked at this city every night for years. He had built himself into something the city feared. He had taken everything it had tried to do to him and turned it into power. He was not sad to leave. He was almost, not quite, but almost at peace. Ready? Elena said from behind him. He turned. She was wearing a dark coat, her bag over one shoulder, her hair loose for once. She was looking at him with the steady, warm, clear-eyed look that he had, over the course of the last year, come to understand was the most valuable thing he had ever been given. Yes, he said. They took the elevator down. The car was waiting. They walked toward it through the building's underground garage. The explosion of sound came from everywhere at once. Gunshots, multiple overlapping from multiple directions. Glass breaking, shouting. Adrian's instincts were already moving him before his conscious mind fully processed what was happening. He pulled Elena down, behind a concrete pillar, and put his body between her and the direction the shots were coming from. Men poured into the garage. 12, 15, more, all in dark clothing, all armed. Vosek's men. Adrian knew their faces. He had studied every enemy he had ever made. His own men, the 2 who had been waiting with the car, were already down. He had his own weapon. He was beneath everything, the thing his reputation said he was, and in the next 60 seconds the garage became a place of terrible noise and motion. Adrian moving through it like he was made of something different than other people, faster and colder and more precise than anyone had a right to be, while bullets filled the air. He was winning. He could feel it. There was a path through this. And then Elena made a sound behind him. He turned. She had moved. She had been trying to get to better cover, moving behind him, and a bullet that had been meant for him had not missed everything. She was on the ground. He was at her side before he understood how he got there. The world contracted to a point. The garage, the shooting, the Vasek men, it all went silent and small and far away. Everything was just her face. Her eyes, open and looking at him. Her left hand pressed to her side. "Elena," he said. His hands were shaking. Adrian Volkov's hands, which had not shaken for more than a decade, were shaking. "I'm okay," she said, in the voice of someone who was trying to be accurate and wasn't sure they were. "I'm okay." She stopped. He gathered her up. He stood. He moved through the remaining men with a ferocity that was not strategy or training, but pure animal, the kind of force that comes from something deeper than skill, from the part of a person that has nothing left to lose. He got her outside. He got her to the street. He called for an ambulance with one hand while holding her with the other, and the city was wet and bright around them. And he sat on the cold pavement with her in his arms and held her the way he had been afraid to hold anything for years. She was conscious. That was what he kept telling himself. She was conscious, which meant she was alive, which meant it was not over. She looked up at him with those warm brown eyes, and he could see the effort it was costing her to stay focused, to keep looking at him. Her hand came up slowly, and touched his face, his jaw, her cold fingers against his skin. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," he said. His voice was someone else's, some stranger's voice coming out of his mouth. "You're crying," she said, a hint of wonder in it, like she had found something unexpected. He hadn't known. He didn't deny it. "Don't," she said. "You look terrible when you cry." He made a sound that was not a laugh but wanted to be. "The ambulance is coming," he said. "You're going to be fine. You're a doctor. You know how to be fine." She smiled. It was a small, tired, true smile. "Adrian, don't. Listen to me." He couldn't breathe. He didn't say anything. "I was never afraid of you," she said. "Do you know that? Not once. Not even when I found out everything. Because when I looked at you, I never just saw the monster. I saw the man too." She paused. Her breathing was shallow. Her hand was still on his face. "For a monster," she said, and there was something like softness and something like a joke and something like the most serious thing she had ever said, all in the same few words. "You loved me beautifully." He pressed his forehead to hers. He was still holding her when the ambulance arrived. He was still holding her when the paramedics gently, carefully moved him aside. He stood in the street in the rain and watched them work. And somewhere in the time between the ambulance arriving and the moment a paramedic looked up at him with that particular expression, the one that doesn't need words, he understood. He understood, and the world did not end. That was the terrible thing. The world did not end. It just kept going. The city kept its noise. The rain kept falling. The ambulance lights kept turning, and Adrian Volkov stood in the middle of it and felt the place inside him where something had been beginning to grow go suddenly, completely, permanently still. Like a door closing, like a key turning. He found them all. Vasek's men, every one of them who had been in that garage, were found within 72 hours. The Vasek organization, which had taken 2 generations to build, was dismantled in less than a week. Adrian moved through it the way fire moves through dry wood. Completely, leaving nothing. He felt nothing while he did it. Not satisfaction, not anger, not relief. Just a cold, mechanical purpose, like a machine completing the last function it was designed for before it shut down. Then he went looking for Marco. It didn't take long. Marco, to his credit or discredit, had not run. Perhaps he had convinced himself that Adrian would understand eventually. That Adrian would see the logic of what he had done. Perhaps Marco, who had always been good at rationalizing, had constructed some version of events in which he was not the villain. Adrian found him at the apartment he kept in Midtown. Marco was sitting at his kitchen table when Adrian walked in. 2 of Marco's own security men were in the hallway. They stepped aside without a word when they saw Adrian's face. Marco looked at him. The wide smile was gone. In its place was something that might have been guilt, but was probably mostly fear. "Adrian, don't," Adrian said. He pulled out a chair across from Marco and sat down. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move with threat. He just sat and looked at Marco, and Marco looked back. Adrian had done things in his life that he would not describe to Elena, would not have described to Elena. He was not a good man and had never pretended otherwise. But he had a code. It was simple and it was his, and he had kept it for 15 years. You protected the people you brought into your world. You did not use them. You did not sell them. Marco had taken the woman Adrian loved and put her in the path of bullets. You thought I was becoming weak, Adrian said. It wasn't a question. Marco was quiet. You thought she was making me soft. You thought that was dangerous. Adrian's voice was completely flat. You told yourself you were doing what was necessary. You told yourself it was about the organization. You told yourself it was loyalty. Still, Marco said nothing. It wasn't any of those things, Adrian said. You know what it was. Marco looked at the table. Adrian stood. He looked down at the man who had stood at his side for 12 years. The man who had known him better than anyone and still done what he had done. He waited for anger. He looked for it. He reached inside himself in all the places where fury lived. There was nothing there. Just empty. Just that particular gray kind of empty that wasn't peace and wasn't grief and wasn't anything with a name. You didn't kill me that night, Adrian said. You killed the only man I could have been. He turned and walked out of the apartment. Marco sat at the kitchen table for a long time after he was gone. He was still alive. He would wonder, in the weeks that followed, why he was still alive. Adrian could have ended him in that apartment and no one would have said a word. By any logic of the world they both lived in, Marco should have been dead. He would eventually understand that this was its own kind of punishment. Left alive, in a city where every person who mattered knew what he had done, that was not mercy. That was something else. Marco disappeared from New York within the month. No one went looking for him. Elena Reyes was buried on a Wednesday in late autumn, in a cemetery in the Bronx, under a sky that couldn't make up its mind between rain and gray. Her mother was there, her friends from medical school, colleagues from the hospital. Dr. Chen, who had operated alongside her that first night, stood near the back and looked at the ground. There was one man standing at the far edge of the cemetery, separated from the rest of the mourners by 50 yards of grass. He wore dark clothes and stood very still, and no one approached him. And he approached no one. He stayed until the last person left. Then he stood alone at the grave for a long time. No one knows what he said. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. That is between him and the grass and the gray sky and whatever is on the other side of graves. He walked away when he was done. That was the last time most people saw Adrian Volkov. In the months that followed, things happened that people in certain circles talked about for years. The Volkov organization did not collapse. It continued to operate, managed by people he had trusted with specific things, guided by structures he had put in place. But its architect was gone. The presence that had made it terrifying, the still, cold, watchful intelligence at its center, was absent. People looked for him. Rivals who had waited years for a moment of vulnerability. Journalists who had followed his story from the edges, never close enough to print anything. Law enforcement agencies in multiple cities who had thick files with his name on them and little else. No one found him. Some said he was dead, that whatever remained of the Vosic organization had gotten to him, or that he had arranged his own end, or that grief had finally done what bullets never could. Others said he was alive somewhere, in a country with no extradition, starting over under a name that no one knew. In the neighborhood where Elena had grown up in the Bronx, things changed quietly in the year after her death. The building where her mother lived, which had been in poor repair for years, was suddenly renovated. The community clinic 2 blocks away received an anonymous donation that let it stay open 5 extra days a week. A small fund was established at Stevie Michael's Hospital in the name of Elena Reyes, providing scholarships to medical students who couldn't afford to continue their training. No one officially knew who was behind these things, but the people who thought about it really thought about it had a sense. There is a particular kind of love story that doesn't end happily but also doesn't exactly end. The person is gone. The love stays. Sometimes the love turns into something you can do with your hands, a building repaired, a clinic kept open, a young doctor given the chance Elena herself had been given. It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't fill the space that was left. But it is something. It is a man saying, in the only language he had left, she mattered. This much she mattered. The city kept going, as it always does. New York is not a city that pauses for anything, not for grief, not for love, not for the end of empires. The streets stayed loud. The lights stayed bright. New names rose and new powers shifted and new stories began in the dark corners where stories like this one always begin. But sometimes in those dark corners, when someone said the name Volkov, the room would go quiet. Not out of fear anymore, out of something that was harder to name. Because the story that had made the name famous was not the story of a devil who ruled a city. It was the story of a devil who once in his entire life had been loved truly and had, in return, loved truly back. And for a while, just a little while, had been something more than what he was born to be. The monster could rule the world, but the man had found something the world couldn't give him back. And so the devil disappeared. And somewhere in a small town, on a quiet coast, under a different sky, maybe, just maybe, a man who used to be something terrible learns what it means to live without power, and remembers every day the woman who looked at him without fear, and whispers back, to no one, to the air, to whatever is left, I know I did.